to our first presentation. And this guy, if you were here yesterday, you know he's a really dynamic speaker. Again, his biography is over there. Take a look at it. I'm not going to go over it in a lot of detail, but really an amazing resource locally here in the community and doing a fantastic job. We're going to see some of his work on another tour this afternoon after lunch. Instead of sitting down and falling asleep after lunch, we're going to get outside.
That's Kay's work.
Yes.
That's Kay's work. I just...
So, Jim Oker, thank you very much.
Thanks so much. I'm not going to...
Alrighty. It'll pick you up.
Yeah, the camera's pretty good. And again, thanks everyone for attending. I absolutely enjoy working collaboratively with so many groups. The Highlands Historical Society, the shirt I have on right now. We partner with the North Lakeland Discovery Center on a host of tours and projects. And we partner with the Forest History Association and so many other groups, including the DNR. And I just really have to say that working with Beth, Tom, Adam, the leadership, it has really opened a lot of opportunities for us to learn more and to share and preserve our heritage. When I go in the field and do archaeology, I work under the permit of the historic preservation officers in the DNR, and they're informed, as are the property managers, so everything is done according to state law, and these are great, great opportunities. So here you're going to get 1 hour on my take on elements of the centennial of the Northern Highland American Legion Forest. You can't do it all, but I'm going to try to take you through a chronological march that'll give you certain insights. So I have E.M. Griffith. We talked a lot about it on our tours yesterday, and an old picture of Cornelius Harrington here in a modern picture. And this is Heather Berglund, who is the head of forestry. I got a Manitwish River picture right off that Manitwish River campsite that Beth was referencing. And I got a guy who's going fishing and he's packing a pistol on his hip because he's hoping to shoot a muskie rather than use his landing net. Practices, policies, things like this, they do change over time, and we're going to take that journey right now, all right? So to really start the notion of the Northern Highland American Legion Forest, it started in 1878 as a state park, and this is the legislature's goal to put aside acreage in this area of Oneida, Vilas, Iron County, maybe a little bit of Price, and preserve that for all sorts of purposes. But what happened is in 1897, the state authorized the sale of all that to timber interests, and it was all cut over. Okay? So that was a nice notion, and that notion disappeared quickly. And the cutover first started with our cork pine river drive logging that John Berg gave us a whole background on. This is the H&K Dam on the Manitwish River right now. And everything that couldn't go out on the rivers went out on the rails for the most part. And this is the Turtle Lake Lumber Company up in Winchester that we talked about at Windman yesterday. And that is a Weininger train from Presque Isle. So these are the methods that the cutover is going to be largely using to clear the area. There's a lot of competition within the DNR, I found out, about who was the first state forest. And I think Flambeau said that they were, and I can tell you that story later. But by going back to the Blue Book, it's very clear that in 1903, 40,000 acres of land in Oneida, Vilas, and Iron counties were set aside for the Forest Reserve. This is the precursor to the Northern Highland American Legion Forest. And indeed, right where we stand was first, and we are indeed number one. 1903 is interesting because there was conservation business going on with the state beforehand. Forestry was a little controversial. Fishing was not. Stocking fish was a big deal. They had the Badger fish car that had tanks and aerators in it. And this is in Woodruff. And they have all these milk pails, and all the locals would show up to get the fish they ordered, and they'd get on their buckboards, and they'd race to their lake, and they would dump them all off, all right? Trying to stock the lakes and so on. This is the Minocqua hatchery. This is the interior. This is this dam. Take a look at that dam. And I have a little story of hijinks in that 1903 data. So walleye fry planted in 1903 here in the forest escaped from the fish hatchery into Minocqua weighing 5 million walleyes. And so what happened undoubtedly is one of the locals decided, probably supported with some liquor or something else to dull his senses, you know, if we open that gate, all those fish are going to go right into our lake. And that's exactly what they did. All right? So forestry is going to start in 03 at the same time. But in 1910, and you're going to see this again and again in a lot of our early publications, fires were terrible. Buswell up on Papoose Lake burned. There were 200 people displaced, a huge loss within that area. And this was being repeated across the cutover. And it really was leading to a call of action. We see in the early publications from the Department of Forestry, they show the burning of lands in Vilas County. Here's another one in 1910 in Vilas County. I have more of these. This is a call to action, a sense of urgency that's coming out of the literature, so we have a sense of the people at that time. There's a new group of foresters, and E.M. Griffith is going to be the leader of this, that has a different vision of all of it. He envisioned mostly an evolution of state forests and public lands within the forest reserve. These are pictures of the time. This is a lovely picture I took not too long ago around Pallet Lake, that there would be a managed forest, scientifically managed for multiple uses. But the reality is, this is what it looked like north of Trout Lake. All right, and somebody had to deal with that as well. And that is part of what the Department of Forestry had to do, enter in E.M. Griffith. Basically, he had control of state and some federal lands on the 33 township. That's basically a line between Oconto and Taylor counties up north. He used the Wisconsin Department of UW Agricultural Department to identify lands that are suitable for agriculture. He sold those lands, he retrieved that money, and he bought back cutover lands to build what he would call the Forest Reserve. This is all documented brilliantly. We talked about Fred Wilson over and over yesterday in our Heights, in this wonderful story supported by the DNR, written by Wilson in 1982, and I think it's on all of our websites for people to easily access. So these are his 3 goals, and what Beth just said, they're still the goals largely today. First, to maintain the headwaters and important rivers. Second, to provide raw material for our wood-using industry. And third, make an attractive resort region. So again, on mission, on point, and it's uncanny how Griffith tried to develop this model and advance it forward. In 1911, he envisioned a centralized model of forestry that would be showcased in the Forest Reserve right here. This is a map that illustrates the headquarters here at Trout Lake. This green arrow is where we went yesterday, to the Russ Lake Station and that tower. And there would be one at Boulder Junction, or actually Oxley. And then there's one on Plum Lake, the tower on Muskie Mountain, and then one on Little Car Lake. Those are where the original ranger stations were going to be. And this would be the incubator for other forestry to go out to spread best practices, he thought, through the counties. So we get this beautiful building that is created. They bring logging specialists in from the northwest part of the state. They put this together and it becomes an iconic image. I talked to Craig Dalton. He was present as a young DNR worker when that was deemed unfit, and they demoed it. And Craig said he watched it. They took a D9 bulldozer to it, put chains on its internal support. The bulldozer backed up, gave it a yank, and stalled. No. The building was that sturdy. But I'm sure it had been infested by bats, as most log cabins, and it probably got that odor, and boy, we missed one there for historic preservation. All right? But back in the day, all the press came out, getting 20,000 acres from the federal government, collaborating with the Wood and Forestry Lab down in the UW-Madison, and we are leading forestry, one of the top 3 groups in the entire state. So Griffith is off and running. As I said before, he used the UW Agricultural Group to find the non-agricultural lands, all right? And it was important for forestry work, landowners, and nothing to say of the incoming settlers. This is eerie foreshadowing of the problems that are going to be existing. He found through the UW data that only 15% of the forest reserve had possibility for farming. We'll get back to that a little bit later. So as he used those monies to buy forestry land, most of the land was developed in Vilas County, but there was also other counties, Forest, Iron, Oneida, and alike. The locals were thrilled. You're going to stop these forest fires, and now you're going to help us with our deer hunting. This is going to bring in greater recreation and tourism. So initially, the folks on the Forest Reserve were absolutely embraced and loved by the community. So they built their 4 stations. Here's the Rest Lake one. I put an arrow on it, and they have the township range, and there's even more detail like that. The University of Wisconsin College of Agriculture actually created a 2-year curriculum for the forest rangers. So the UW Agriculture, they're playing both sides, as you're going to find out pretty quick here, are supporting this. And these are the 12 original forest rangers who took the civil service test in Rhinelander and came up into this area. That's Fred Wilson right there, for those of you who are a big fan of him and his work. But this is what, because these men are not foresters. Some were trained foresters, but rangers were different. Griffith said, "It is the intention to appoint forest rangers who will live in the reserve, act as fire patrol to prevent the setting or spread of forest fires, build fire lanes, roads, and trails, plant areas that have been denuded, and scale mature timber." And there are the names of the first 12 right here. They are the ones who came in and established them. You can see Fred Wilson over here in the corner. This is Christensen. He runs the Trout Lake Station. His son John goes into the military, wrote a beautiful book with little vignettes about growing up on State House. And those stories, if you haven't read that, you really need to get a look at that. It'll make you chuckle. And of course, I always like pointing out Frank Long, Art Long, the artist. That's part of his family. Frank died in service to the Wisconsin Conservation Commission, and they changed the name of Bear Lake to Frank Lake. This is north of Plum, in honor of his service. So a little review of those folks who came first. But here they are. They got to go to work. I love this one because this is all part of the telephone communications that would have to go to be able to call into the station at Trout Lake to report fires. But look how level the forest is at this juncture. We're going to see some more images. This is what the first foresters saw a lot of, and we kind of lose sight of that. And here they're measuring trees and so on. And again, more pictures of fire in Vilas County. And then they talk here about the 4 towers. But they modified windmill towers and made their own platform and only later put on a canvas roof. Take a look at this. That's a windmill tower. There's your telephone right there. And they just manufactured that themselves to go up in them. These are 85 footers. And there was one at Rest Lake and all the others that I went to. And this is what they worked on. They also tried to tell people not to start fires, be careful with their campgrounds. On Monday, under a permit from the DNR, I took a drone operator out. That is the drone operating, and this is Lake Tomahawk, and this is Muskie Mountain Towers that are still available. We did 360-degree videos of them, and we are going to have that in the Northwoods Forest History Experience running on a loop, so people today could go in and see the landscape that these rangers saw in 1912. Rangers built roads. This is the group of rangers. They were using horses and alike. very soon, mechanical means of transportation will come to bear. Here's a fire lane. Here's an evening fire in Vilas County, 1910. So you can see this reoccurrence of fire is really important. And then the creation of all of these different satellites. These are like spokes in a wheel that will surveil for fires in the area. This is the Boulder Junction Ranger Station, which is right here. This is the H&K Dam that I showed you early. And the fire tower is right here. I found that site. It actually has foundations and geological markers for 2 towers on it. 2 towers. So that might be a fun destination to do something with
Jim,
clue.
I had a question. So why are there so many fires? Have there always been lots of fires, and now that the people live there, they don't want the fires? Or?
Well, the fires come because of unregulated logging practices and leaving behind a lot of woody debris called slash in different areas, climatic changes, and then really stupid practices, particularly with railroads. 2 examples. 1, they didn't put spark arresters on their chimneys, and 2, they had a practice when their ash pans were full, they would throw it out the side of the car in the right-of-way, and these just caused a lot of fires. Not to mention burning for farmers. It goes on and on. But it was a plague in the North Woods. All right. So this is where we were yesterday. There's that denuded hill. We climbed that hill yesterday, gang, and we were right there, okay? And then this is that windmill fire tower here. This is that approach. Here is the construction of the cab. The guys up there actually building it, so you get to see that moment in 1912. And here in that largely denuded hill, there's the pole, and they're still putting the tar paper on the shed outside. That's all happening here, and that's Herman Krieger, our fire ranger. So we go from this, as I said yesterday, ranger station, to the Tower Inn and post office, to the Tower Tea Room. As I said before, this had the unholy trinity of moonshine, gambling, and prostitution, and there was a gunfight there with Oscar Hankey from the Hurley gangs right there in the streets. And then ultimately today, it's Maggie's, where the board ate on Thursday night in a lovely Asian fusion environment. It's kind of interesting how these things progress over time. Walking around Clear Lake, Fred Wilson said in his book he met Ranger Krieger. Here's Ranger Krieger, Forest Ranger. That is the one for the Rest Lake Tower. There were other men of great importance that cut their teeth in what will become the Northern Highland American Legion Forest. Cornelius Harrington, he was a Hurley guy, and he wanted to become a forester. This is a letter from Harrington reaching out, this is a letter from Griffith reaching out to Harrington, encouraging him to come and work in the forest, and that he did. He was also in the 20th Engineering Division with several other local people. Kay Cron's did an amazing video on this. It's on the Forest History Association website. I really think you should take a look at that. It has a lot of information, but here's the deep dive. These are pictures. That's Harrington working in the camp. That's what workers, not rangers, the workers, that's how they lived. And those are the roads that they were clearing at that time. It's really neat that we came across those collections. There were other little events that took place during the time that are kind of interesting. At the game management side, they were collecting a lot of fawns initially, and they said, boy, you know, we should pen these things up and try to manage this and take care of them. So between South Trout Lake and Aliquash Lake, they put in about a 300-acre swath, and they expanded it to over 600 acres later. But on 2 different occasions, they tried to introduce elk there. This was the first major elk introduction. This is an elk that ultimately was let loose, as pictured in Land O'Lakes. But they got pneumonia. They suffered in their environment. They overbrowsed it. They habituated on humans, and they became particularly nasty Jerry Trapp, who recently passed away, grew up over in Arborvitae. He remembers as a little boy that a bull elk like that came to the stairs of their house during the rut and tore the front stairs off the house with its antlers and left. 4 men were arrested for poaching, and most of these elk died at the hands of poachers. So some people from the city show up with a pistol and they start shooting the elk. The guy with the gun ended up losing 2 teeth, getting knocked unconscious by the elk, and ultimately the warden came and arrested all of them. This is from the Rhinelander Daily News. More importantly and more long-lasting is the nurseries on Trout Lake. Griffith left Yale University as a scientist because there was no forestry degree appropriate for what he wanted to accomplish, and went to Germany. And he imprinted on that very strongly. In doing so, we see a German example of forestry, and that's what they created at Trout Lake. It was absolutely borrowed from that experience. The forestry division is kind of interesting. They had nurseries. The one at Big Trout Lake we know real well, but there's also one at Lake Tomahawk of 3 acres. And it kind of gets mixed in with, I think, some of the agriculture around what will be the McNaughton Correctional Facility. But that's another place for us to find to tell that broader story. But back to the Trout Lake Nursery itself, started in 1911. Here's a picture in 1955. But it will be later moved to the south to the Griffith Nursery for the purpose of better growing conditions for plants. But as a long, long tenure, there are many signs there that commemorate this, and how this replanting was absolutely critical. Another thing that was really kind of important, and I didn't have enough time to put all my slides in, but I actually got pictures of DNR folks in 1911 surveying Trout Lake. They had to go back and resurvey and set the bearing trees and alike. We went to some of those bearing trees yesterday in our hike on Vance Lake. And one of the reasons why they were doing this, not only to set their boundaries, Griffith was very interested in leasing campsites and cottages. Right when you pull out of the North Lakeland Discovery Center, you'll look across the road in Rest Lake Park. That used to be known as the Hoosier Club. It's an enclave of Indiana people who came up here and leased that site, and they stayed there and they loved it. But the problem with leases, they're not permanent. And there was a lot of bitterness, but they will lose that. This is the Chicago Northwestern. Not only were they hauling logs, they were moving tourists. And for $2, you could have your own tent site all year. How's that? On a 20-year lease, you get it? Some people were more ambitious. How do you like that big log cabin? You have your own island. It costs a little bit more. You know, these things were coming about. Here in Manitowish Waters, I've researched this out. This is Serban Park. 2 families here from Hurley, we call it Finn Bay because they are Finlanders, had leased land. This is the Hoosier Camp right here. And right here at Fern Lodge, a woman by the name of Ethel Powell rented what is now the canoe campsite area there. And if you go there, you can actually still see her lilac trees on that property. And that ran for several years before it became a DNR campsite. Today, ironically, this is Hoosier Camp, Rest Lake Park. This is the campsite on Vance Lake, and this is Serban Park. They're public access areas, and it really shows the evolution of land, and really even after the lease is really fitting into making this community so much stronger. Griffith had all sorts of out-of-the-box ideas. One of which was, because there was no air conditioning back there and consumptive diseases like TB and other respiratory problems were an issue, he thought that he could bring people up with those diseases, put them in little cabins or tent communities, and ultimately have them take care of the nursery. They could pick berries, take care of things. Oh, this is all in the literature. Pretty funny. How many of you have heard of Dr. Kate, the angel on snowshoes? I did some archaeology out there with Mark Brewy 25, 30 years ago because of some discoveries. And I was talking to the grandson. He said, yeah, when Dr. Kate came up, she came up because her husband had worked in World War I in Detroit in the auto manufacturing and got a bunch of acid vapors in his lungs, because that's what they use to stop corrosion on the bodies of the trucks. And they came up for that issue. And then, before she did anything in Minocqua, or this area, she ran a sanitarium, tent city, right there on the river. People would come up on the train, and then she would take care of them over the summer and convalesce them. Well, the state got involved. In 1910, they created the Wisconsin Tuberculosis Rehabilitation Center. That's where the McNaughton Correctional Institute is today. Absolutely. And when this all changed in 1957, when the tuberculosis group closed, they moved McNaughton here. Here are the farms. I was inspecting this with DNR staff 2 weeks ago, and then all of the prisoners would mill all their own wood. They would grow all their own food. They would take care of all their animals. This is all done. This is a National Register of Historic Places site. And then, of course, there's something new. Then the DNR employee said, you know what? There were Italian POWs there also from World War II. So when you think about the forest, it gets repurposed in a lot of different things early on. Isn't that kind of interesting? So Griffith's plan was to bounce from his 400,000 acres to 1.5 million. That's his plan. That was the goal of what his forest reserve was going to be. All right? Well, now we have a conflict because the UW Extension agricultural agent, Ellis Luther, he is going to accuse Griffith of making a playground for the rich and claim the axe to the plow is the way to go. And this is going to create a battle royale that will not end well for forestry. Sadly, real compromise on both sides was lacking. This was a clumsy practice that led to change based on harsh economic realities, but it will birth what becomes the Northern Highland American Legion Forest. So we've got to look at that. So here is a lot of information. We'll get to Farming the Cutover by Robert Goff in a little bit. Robert Goff really called a lot of this agricultural hype boosterism. And here's the beginning of it. That this county, Oneida, or Vilas County, has better soil than large parts of Wapaka, Washera, Portage, Wood, Adams, Juneau, Jackson, Columbia, Monroe, and La Crosse. It's fraudulent. That's all there can be said to it. Legitimately, and know that Plum Lake is saner, Wisconsin. There were tax problems because so much state land was in saner, and that was not resolved. And this is a small, pretty strong protest actually from these local communities, and this had to be reconciled. And it was one thing that Griffith couldn't get through. For any of you who've ever received a poison pen letter from somebody who doesn't like what you're doing, you might enjoy this little one right here. This was sent to E.M. Griffith. It is from Leon Doolittle from Eau Claire. He is a farmer, an attorney, and a robust land speculator. And he was whipping up the farmers here in this area in an absolute frenzy. And part of the letter says, in fact, you are the landowner's worst enemy in that region. You are his only active enemy. Wow. In reality, the propaganda from the Department of Agriculture to encourage the growth, that's the real story. But this is that kind of banter that was going on, and the politicians were lining up. And then it happened. A whole commission was put together to review everything that Griffith did. Members of the legislature who were farmers, and they were largely favorable. You can get access to this report, and then it's an outside hit. The Supreme Court, which is conservative, comes in, makes a decision, declares state forest illegal, akin to canals building, which is not in the purview of the state, and shut down the state forest. It didn't go through regular channels. Griffith is absolutely devastated. His brilliant reports, the last one was absolutely suppressed, and you still can't get access to it today. They shut it down. They purged it out, deemed not necessary to report. Instead of over 100 pages, it was a half a page, the forestry report.
So where is that, Jim?
If you can find it, I want to read it. All right? There you go. You're good at finding those things.
Woof, woof.
Yeah, a number of state forest rangers were reduced from 12 to 8 and were dispersed all over the area. You know, when you bring in a new regime and you throw one out, you got to kind of wipe your shoe on the previous regime. That's so you're going to build your own system. This happens in bureaucracies, but I love this. Griffith gets the last word. So this socialite from down in Illinois comes up to Trout Lake, and on the train he brings his hydro airplane. Okay, this is Jack Vilas. And he's staying at Mann's, which is now Cardinals, and he's buzzing around and so on. And of course he comes over and kind of hangs out with the forest rangers. And Griffith said, "Hey, mind if I go up, take a ride in that thing?" "Sure, let's go." And he said, "You know, we could really use this for spotting fires. This could be a real technology." Because this is how Griffith thought. He thought differently than others. And so Jack Vilas gave the job of ranger by Griffith. Aviator appointed to spot fires. First surveillance by airplane in the world. But when Griffith leaves, what are they going to do with it? This is junk. Get rid of this system. Today, the DNR only surveils through drones and airplanes for fires. He was right again. But this is the sad story. Just because you're right, it doesn't mean you're going to win. I put this in because this is kind of fun, I think. In 1915, what they do is they take the Department of Forestry, Wardens, Fishery, Wildlife Management, they put it all in, and they create the Wisconsin Conservation Commission. And as part of the first things they did with Wardens, they gave them all motorcycles. Here they are in front of the Capitol building there. For them to, like you think, to get through the cutover and so on, that's not a bad way to move around everything that was down. Back to Robert Goth's analysis of agriculture, this whole notion of boosterism. Images such as this were spread around. Immigrants were attracted to the area. I love this. Agricultural Experimentation Station, opportunities for profitable farming in northern Wisconsin. And there's a constant drone of this going forward over the time. Cutover Lands. This was a magazine where they were trying to sell the cutover. And I just want to give you this one on, you know, winter in this region, snow covered 100 days maybe. Lake regions have a tendency to withhold early frost, permit all crops to go to full growth. In the notes of Fred Wilson, he claims he saw a field of corn frosted and killed in July when he was a ranger. You know these frost pockets that are out there, like the cranberry marshes? Yeah. Anyway, this was in Vilas County, Weininger, that's Presque Isle. They get more snow than anywhere in Vilas County. And so it's just all the absurdity that go along with it. What they were really doing is that these farmers wanted land to farm, but it would be really nice if it was nicely settled next to a lake, if you know what I mean. And like the Bakken family, they farmed legitimately on Bakken Road and set up 2 resorts to have that multiplier effect. But they were following the demand up to World War I. After World War I, there was an agri-recession and prices crashed. And that recession will continue. Boosterism is so effective, the number of farms in Vilas County actually increased in the 20s during this recession. And then, of course, by the stock market crash, it's all over. And it's the collapse of these properties that will usher in the county and federal forests that follow. So people brought up to places like Oxley with the Bluegrass Land Company have all of these promises and hopes, but in the end it's all abandoned in ruin because of, well, this is the invisible hand of economics coming down like a fist on those who don't pay attention. It shifts now. 1925, it's put in. Governor Blaine sends Agricultural Secretary Jardine right to Sainer, the heart of the disagreement with forestry from before, and said, and this is from the News Herald in Marshfield, so Schnitzy likes that, northern Wisconsin could accomplish more for itself and the nation by forestry than by agriculture. Surely that is a startling statement. And the shift begins, and this is where we see. In 1924, they had already changed the state constitution to allow funding for state forests. Amending that constitution, they were limited to 500,000 acres. That's part of it. And they created what is called the Northern Highland American State Forest in 25. It was actually called the Northern Forest Park because they didn't want to have state forests near it because of their previous legal problems. These are ads from the time in 1925. Open new park next summer. Wilderness playground. You know, a new park in Vilas County. This is really ushering in kind of a new age at that time. And many elements of Griffith's forestry plan are being rebirthed here in the area. There were even those who called out against rich men buying Wisconsin land and were advocating for public lands to be established in this window. If any of you think that isn't accurate, I would suggest you look at Vilas County GIS and look at everything north of the state forest and look under property ownership and look at the names and the large tracts. That's what it would be all the way down to Wausau. And there wouldn't be room for teachers like me, okay? That was a real issue. Now, what occurs with the 500,000 limit is important. And there's embedded in here an Easter egg of enormous importance that I think has been overlooked scholarly. So it'll take me a minute to go through this. Federal government in 1925 passed the Enabling Act authorizing the government to purchase lands under the Weeks Law, that's for fire prevention. Here's the thing, and we'll get to it in a moment. The National Forestry Reserve Commission needed the approval of county boards. Keep that in mind. This is big. And this is where they create the Chequamegon and Nicolay Forest. Then Ranger Fred Wilson returned as a crusader of forestry after leaving in disgust, drafting a legislative committee report on forestry, using the forest cropland, and leading to rezoning practices that all bundled together to create our county forests. All right? So, Griffith called this out to begin with. Back in 1911, he said speculative holders of non-agricultural land will gradually let go of some holdings, and the counties will then be able to acquire them. Those counties will secure the greatest permanent prosperity that develop from every acre to its truest and highest usefulness. They should be authorized to create their own forest reserve. He absolutely saw it coming. And that, again, was then driven by his mentee, Mr. Forestry, you know, attached decimated 1 million of acres of unwanted and tax delinquent land in the 30s. And Wilson wrote about this in the Wisconsin Magazine of History and outlined all of it. and gave due credit to Griffith. So now we have a mosaic of public lands. This all happens basically between 1925 and 1930. It's a giant shift in that period. So you have 2.4 million acres here. I was told by Doug at the meeting the other day, there are now 30 Wisconsin counties, and they have even more acres than I have cited here. But you put all these together, and this is the puzzle how it fits. I am going to ask your indulgence and your insight, because for the Northwoods Forest History Experience, we're trying to create a map to show that mosaic. We're working with the UW Cartography Department. So what we have here is basically, most of you probably can figure it out, state, federal, county forest overlaid, showing that mosaic. And I think that's a real teachable moment to teach this period that I'm speaking of. The trouble is the DNR names things that look like a forest different things. So there's 25,000 acres, I think, Tom, of state natural areas in this area that you manage. And so that's not on the list. The scenic waterway at the Turtle Flambeau is not in there. And the wildlife area, Paul Marsh. So for the purposes of teaching the public, do we keep it strictly forest, or do we create a fourth color for state lands? I really would like to have you reflect on that. You don't have to, raise your hands right now. But how can we tell this story and use this map as a visual to convey it to the public, this important arc of time? So please consider that and reach out to me as you can. So he says it has been recommended that the best agricultural lands be settled, that poor lands of acquisition and possibility be sold, so that settlers may not be doomed to poverty, comparative isolation, and deprived of good schools and advantages. This was a real problem for townships. If you have a family that's way back in the woods and they have kids, John, we have to provide emergency services and schools for those kids, right? That's under state statute. And so this rezoning stopped that by Fred Wilson, consolidated that, and really reorganized the forest so you could build communities rather than these disparate areas. One of the greatest guys over from, he's actually over at Star Lake, Ole Rysam, he said, "We have done everything Mr. Griffith advocated. He should have had our support." This is in 1933 when Vilas County created their county lands. And if you look at these county lands, this is how they come in like this. Iron County, 48,000. Oneida County, 87,000. Vilas County, 28,000. Those are the acreages that were added in the day. So now we have exceeded the number of acres that Griffith had envisioned, not under his state model, and it is really cool. And here, like we said, the flagship, other things were going on. This is the Camp American Legion. This was an interesting thing that was brought forward after World War I. The American Legion wanted to create a place for people to convalesce. Many of you might know that actually Plum Lake Hemlocks was the actual site for this. They were going to have veterans who desired to spend their vacations up north, allotted on the space at the end of the portage right here on Star Lake. And then on Plum Lake, that's where they would have the disabled veterans, and they would put this all together. They worked for years to build this out. They lobbied for it. They were ready to deliver on this in January. By March, they shifted. It turned out that Camp Minnewawa down at Lake Tomahawk, Marcus Ebert became sick. They fell upon hard times. In 3 months, they completely pivoted around because all this infrastructure is already there. All the roads are already built. So the Plum Lake Hemlocks, the natural area, was going to be the American Legion camp, but it was saved because of this camp. This was a state leased land operation, by the way, and take the alien veteran, put him on vacation, create scenic beauty. but we know we have the American Legion Forest, right? This is part of our story, and this is how we get hooked in. And they authorized the state legislature the purchase of that property, and that is a land use agreement you have right now. Right, Tom?
Yes.
Still going on. So this is all part of that growing story. And so right here, this is the American Legion Forest and the like. It's funny, the veterans worked so hard and so diligently, and they wanted to create a wildlife refuge there. They were really improving it. The fishing was off the hook. I made a video of this with Jim, the director of that. It's on our YouTube channel for their centennial this year. But there was huge pressure within Oneida County not to let this happen. They were fine with helping the veterans, but they wanted that land not to be public. They wanted it all to be private. Remember this wildlife refuge, they started that. And so in 1929, 36,000 acres were added, okay? It was the American Legion Memorial State Park and Forest Preserve to begin with. Doesn't really roll off the tongue. By 31, it was the American Legion Forest. And that's how you get the other part of the forest coming together. This is staggering to me. In the Great Depression in 1931, they offered up in their budgets in the Depression $45,000 to develop just the American Legion Forest. That's a huge expenditure in that time. So there was enormous support for that advancement. Speaking of advancement, it's kind of interesting. Here we have all of the ranger stations, patrol cabins, and everything that Griffith was building in those reports that were not published. And I want to focus on Wildcat Lodge because this is another great Northern Highland American Legion Forest story. So they're shutting this down. Remember, they cut the number of rangers, they dispersed them, and these buildings are now without use. On Wildcat Lake, right here by the railroad grade coming out of Boulder Junction, John Christensen from Northwoods Life growing up at State House talked about the Wildcat Lake boat landing. He says it wasn't used. Then there's this guy called Wakeland McNeil, Ranger Mac, who worked with the school forest programs, and he also worked with 4-Hers, and he in 28 started to create what became the Junior Forest Ranger Program for the 4-H. This will ultimately migrate to Upham Woods down in the Dells, but it will be held here for a time. A full curriculum of 4 years, with 4 years being a cruiser. They would even go out and suppress fires and fight fires. It's interesting, later on they'll actually train kids in Mercer at the high school to fight fires as well. So these notions get passed forward from time to time. Here are pictures of Wakeland McNeil walking in the virgin forest, maybe not purely virgin as John told us, but that's what they called it in the time. And they're training these farm kids down around Platteville and places like this, so it's kind of a summer camping thing. They're in their cabin, and then they go back down south and they meet, and their 4-H people get them together. So boom, almost immediately after this, the Dust Bowl comes. And it impacts, the erosion impacts southwestern Wisconsin terribly. And when foresters and managers start saying, we need to build shelter belts, the farmers rebel. They say, no way, you can't put trees next to my corn won't grow. These 4-H kids had already come back, made projects, planted shelter belts on their farm, and could demonstrate that these shelter belts actually worked. And it came right from here. Yeah, kind of a cool story. Well, the DNR faces economic challenges, and so did the Department of Forestry, the Wisconsin Conservation Commission, but there was a window of time when an army was actually made available to those managing our forests. This is in the Northern Highland Forest, Camp Mercer, we were there yesterday, Camp Crystal Lake on White Sand Lake, and Star Lake right here, all supported the headquarters at Trout Lake. This is what they looked like. This is Star Lake, right in the eastern campsite. This is Camp Mercer, where we were yesterday, and this is Camp Crystal Lake on White Sand Lake. hundreds of men available to go out in the field and execute what needed to be done to improve the area. The U.S. Army ran the CCC camp, so managing these 19 and 20-year-old people are not the ranger's job. What they did is they took them into the field and sent them out. This is from a Mercer Monitor newspaper. They're doing tree planting in this particular case. Here they're working up at Winchester in County G, building fire lanes and laying telephone lines. Fish rescue on the turtle flambeau flowage. Turtle flambeau flowage dropped 20 feet and they had to dig channels to rescue fish in that period, and of course firefighting. This is the ranger cabin we didn't get to. We got right here to the ranger garage yesterday. But later that ranger cabin will migrate to Mercer. These men made those bricks. You can see those bricks everywhere across the region, and it came from the CCC. Actually, some people still have the form for those bricks, and these men made all of these bricks, and they were trained by locals called local experienced men, and this really created a lot of infrastructure. We had sub-camps at Pine Lake, Springstead, and up by Presque Isle that fed in here. 12 to 24 men would be there doing all sorts of work. But one of the things they did was they repelled fire. This is the scenes of fire right here in Manitowish. Here are CCC people from Camp Mercer actually extinguishing fires. Here's a bulletin: between 600 and 700 men were engaged in fighting fires in Powell Marsh. Think about that. I mean, armies of men. Here, some CCC youth actually refused to fight the fires and went to jail because these fires were that ferocious and difficult. So after the 4-H left, the FFA got a place in a land use agreement on Jag Lake. That's kind of interesting. When the CCC camp was closed for Camp Crystal Lake on White Sand Lake, the Region 7 canoe base was started at that time as well, and it ran until 1985. Again, this recreational piece that Beth did such a great job to outline. Getting back to our fisheries, folks, during the Great Depression, there was a real lack of money to support fisheries. At Spider Lake, we had a fish hatchery. We talked about that, the first municipal fish hatchery. Later, many others at Big Lake, Fish Trap Lake, Saynard, Pine Lake, Glidden, all will create their own fish hatcheries. On Big Lake, this is where the fish hatchery was. Beth and I will be taking a group of people there next Friday, matter of fact, in the Natural Resource Foundation area. This is the old dam here that has a rapids currently. It's absolutely picturesque and beautiful. And this was at Big Lake. The jars are now full. The men got some 14-pound pike, as well as a few big muskies, around 45 pounds, and 4 such hatcheries were established last year in the Manitowish area. This again was another piece that went into the forest in that time. Manitowish Waters Fish Hatchery, Mercer Fish Hatchery, Lake of the Falls. This is the interior of the Manitowish Hatchery. And then this is by Circle Lily Lake, and these are the rearing ponds that were used to hold the fry after they were developed. As we move into the World War II era, the Wisconsin Conservation Bulletin gives us a lot of information, a lot of patriotic pro-war information. Prevent forest fires. Every year, forest fires destroy enough timber to build 2,000 minesweepers, 85,000 subchasers, 120,000 PT boats, and 215,000 5-room homes for war workers. Getting forestry into the whole movement. Using these early documents, it's interesting, during the war, the Department of the Wisconsin Conservation Commission knew just where they were. The war has brought a decrease in the use of state land for recreational purposes. This is especially true in the area of northern part of the state, and it is not anticipated that we will revive until the days of peace again arrive. And when they do, in the post-war boom, that's when the logging and the recreational drive just go big. So we need pulp. We now have a single person chainsaw that can be manufactured in large groups, and logging began to grow exponentially. Small loggers came up, like Pukal lumber. This is Pukal lumber in Arborvitae today, and they will create their small mills to put together locally resourced wood for building. The paper mills in Wisconsin, April 1949, the vast quantities of pulpwood needed for Wisconsin paper mills is chronicled in that to a great extent. So we talked a lot about aspen, third generation aspen regeneration. Here you see some of the driving forces to those ends. But not only fiber and timber, we'll see here, this is Rest Lake right here. This is Lake of the Falls. Highland Forest offers a natural playground. When you look at the conservation bulletins, almost all of it was on logging, fiber, harvest, but slowly recreation starts moving in, and it starts to transition in the 1960s. This 1957 campground in the Northern Highland Park, you can see how they're budded from end to end, and by 1965, Beth said they'll create so many more campgrounds. The Wausau Daily Herald in 1958 was running up the flag. You can swim, you can tent, you can pick berries, you can go fishing, and you can watch deer, and people still come here for those exact same reasons. We see a lot of the campgrounds in the time have been consolidated. I have Vance Lake right here. That was actually between the campsite over there and Ethel Powell's resort. There was actually 9 campsites there and a boat landing back in the day. Muskie Mountain, why not downhill skiing? Winter recreation. This is a whole new concept. Everybody built 3-season homes, and all of a sudden, wow, we could do much more than that. Yeah, there's a fire tower, but look at the run of that. I don't know if any of you have walked up Muskie Mountain lately. There's a good gradient there, and you can get a decent run. And there it is. And they also were promoting snowshoeing. Within 8 years, the Escanaba Trails will be started, and cross-country skiing will be added to the list of items. The Youth Conservation Corps, I won't go into it too much, Kay's going to give us an hour on that, but it's a CCC of the 60s, Robert Burmaster, fish cribs, cutting trails. This is an important thing. This is Bill Crothers, right here at State House Lake, and women were added later. And this is the row right in front of us, and we're going to chronicle all of that in the Northwoods Forest History Experience that they're going to show you over there. These remote sites are so important for campsites. I'm so glad that Beth brought them up. You know, Region 7 used them for years, and they were ubiquitous for those of you around back in the day. But this is the oldest camp west of the Alleghenies, in Sainer, Camp Highlands in 1904. And there they are in their canvas canoes, portaging and using those same areas back in the day. In 1968, the Conservation Commission turned into the Department of Natural Resources. The Northern Highland State Forest comes under a new leadership model. This one I think is huge, because Beth brought that up with recreation. So this is a historic timeline of the Association of Wisconsin Snowmobile Clubs. So 69, they meet in Monaco, we got 5 clubs, all right? That's when it starts. It didn't, people had snowmobiles, but it wasn't organized. In 71, 18 bills passed. The DNR funds trail construction at over $234,000. I put that into, that's 1 year, an inflation calculator. That's more than $1.8 million. This is a huge financial commitment. And again, the 400 miles of trail, I think that's what Beth said that was out there, really quite amazing. The state natural areas continue to expand and protect a lot of unique and pristine resources for those who lean more toward conservation. An emphasis on best practice for water quality continued going forward, coming from the first thing that E.M. Griffith said that was important in his mission. It continues to be part of this. Treaty right challenges from 1900 to the 1980s continue to go on, and there were real challenges between indigenous communities, particularly the Ojibwa, who had ceded lands here, and the enforcement, resource allocation alike. So these guys, the Tribble brothers, I know you probably know the story, over near Lacoudere, off reservation, we're spearing muskies through the ice, all right? This is time-honored tradition, critical for food resources in the spring and so on. And a warden came up on him and said, you know, you can't be spearing through the ice. And they held up a treaty, and the warden said, well, you know, that may be so, but I'm going to write you a ticket. I'll see you in court. Well, it went through court. Boy, did it. And here you see the Voigt decision right here, affirming the Chippewa hunting, fishing, and gathering rights. Here I have a picture of gathering birch bark as an example, but certainly, you know, deer harvest, fish harvest, and alike will continue. And it has reshaped the use of the forest. The DNR has made a lot of adjustments. Being a historic preservation advocate, I want to do a shout out. Beth, we saw these signs yesterday, created these signs to protect resources. We had looting going on at Camp Mercer. We had some metal detecting people breaking the law. We get that signage, but there's other sites out there. I don't know if any of you have been to Plum Lake to see their leased lands, but these are all structures that are back there in the hemlocks that all should be protected because they're part of that great story of the Northern Highland Forest. And to be able to post those and form wardens and learn to communicate with the DNR is absolutely key. The reason why I bring that up is we don't want this to happen. The portage from Star to Plum Lake. This was a trail marker tree bent over by indigenous people, and probably was either Ojibwa or Potawatomi, because there's a huge Potawatomi community right up in Partridge Lake. And here's a blaze in a hemlock that's still there, so that's a culturally modified tree. How does it look there? Isn't that amazing? Trail marker tree. I attended Camp Highlands for 11 years. I hung out underneath that tree. Everybody loved it. By 1990, somebody went in there and just sawed it to pieces. Now this is before the DNR had any kind of cultural management officially on the books and so on. After a loss like this, it's so satisfying to see attention to our cultural resources, you know, coming to the forefront so we don't lose things like that. So you see this twisted tree, this is on Round Lake. There's portages all through that area. I talked to Beth. Beth talked to the forester who was managing the cut in that area. I put a pin in the map. Forester said, we're not going to get near that thing. We'll mark it. We'll take care of it. So if we communicate, we collaborate, and we share, and we advocate for historic preservation, that's something you foresters see more than most people in the woods, and you can be champions for this kind of work. And so in the 21st century, we have reshaped technology. Remember that fancy one-man chainsaw? It seems a little outdated right now, doesn't it? As you see the logging equipment that goes on here. But I want to say that there's an advantage to this on historic preservation. So they did a thinning at Camp Mercer, and I walked that with Adam, Beth, and Ben Burkhardt, and so we would mark the trees and not disturb anything, but it got close to the dynamite shack and so on. The arms on these things can reach 30 feet, reach across the road, not touch anything, grab the tree, bring it all the way back, and process the tree outside of it. The contractors there did a phenomenal job. And that's, again, how communication and understanding the technology and opportunities can really press things going forward. So here we are. These are the recreational stops all across the forest right now. I took that off your webpage. I assume that's kind of current. And it is amazing. And it is maybe a playground, but I call it home. And I share this home with many other people. And I think the more we respect it and preserve it and learn about it, the better it's going to be. And we're going to try to tell that story at the Northwood Forest History Experience right across the way and send people in the woods using Clio apps so they can go find these adventures for themselves. Well, exactly 1 hour. There we go.
Wow.
We do have time for Q&A, and we should do that. And since I'm the moderator, I get to start, right? So, you know, this debate between agriculture and forestry has been going on a long time. But and I understand there are different soil conditions, but the Menominee people just east of us were very successful in farming, and they're discovering more and more raised bed gardens along the Menominee River.
Yep.
Directly east of it. It's a different situation, but I think it shows too that the traditional ecological knowledge they had about how to grow corn in those types of situations. It's just amazing, and it's kind of new research. And I did want to say, we have our partners here from the Wisconsin Archaeology Society. We share a board member in Cindy, so it's just a bunch of encourage you to stop by their table, but it just seems kind of unusual. That
I have a great comment with that. Absolutely. The outright rejection of indigenous practice and genius was commonplace. I'm working with Val in Lac de Flambeau and Cindy with a grant from the Archaeological Society to create signage to talk about how the government's forced agricultural practices were doomed and how the indigenous successful gardening and other traditional practices were absolutely ignored, I would argue, for the purposes of enculturation. And so, yes, a lot could have been learned that way. Just as we learned from Jed about burning and the wood. And so the Menominee are kind of on the forefront of that, but because they had autonomy over their lands. And Cindy and Val or I could tell you, and it will be in the museum, the Ojibwa did not have autonomy over their lands. They did not have Menominee tribal enterprises. They had skullduggerous agents who controlled every aspect of their lives, including their money. And like a company town, whatever an indigenous family who had an allotment would then convey that allotment to be harvested. They were paid in coupons, not cash. And instead of 100%, they were paid at 20%. And this has all been brought up in a new document we have that was overseen in testimony by Senator LaFollette. So, yeah, there's a lot, you just unpacked a lot right there. So that's absolutely true. Yeah.
Has there been any conversation, and this might not be a question for you, but has there been any conversation about any kind of land back issues among the state forest, like particularly important cultural sites, or sharing signage, sharing governing of those sites?
Well, that's a Tom question. I can tell you there's a lot of work going on with wild rice right now. Would be an example of a lot of collaboration practices going on. But I think it's moving that way. Maybe you'll talk about that, Tom, in your presentation.
I don't really touch on that too much in my talk. Are you talking about lands reverting back?
Yeah, like for example, up by the picture, not picture rocks. What's the Bayfield one? Apostle Islands. There's some of that shoreline has been given back over to the tribe, or they're managing, as a recreational resource. I'm wondering if there's ever been any conversation about that around here.
I don't know, to be honest with you, and I haven't heard any of those conversations. I think in some cases it might make some sense. We do work very closely with the tribes. We get together with them a couple of times a year just to describe what we're doing on the forest, because there are certain things that they're interested in, mostly access to the public lands for hunting and gathering. So they like to know where we're actively managing areas that may have enhanced hunting for them or gathering. We also do have several areas on the state forest that are set aside specifically for firewood harvest for tribal members. In terms of actual land going back to the ownership, I haven't heard
So I worked on that particular transfer back for Red Cliff,
Yeah.
and it's kind of a rare thing, but it does happen on occasion. I would argue that we could do more of that, but there's also the piece that Tom was talking about with co-management, or actually deferring management, where the traditional ecological knowledge is in the native community. There could be a whole lot more of that. There definitely needs to be more protection of some of the sites too, and we work very closely with the State Historical Society to make sure when we do projects that we aren't doing the damage and working and being culturally sensitive to some of those historical, particularly the grave sites, things like that. So it's a complex regulatory question.
Tom, haven't some of the tribes purchased lands back that they particularly desired?
The one I worked on was just the transfer of land.
Just transfer?
They replaced the land, so there was no money exchange.
Electric Land was purchasing land right now. They purchase land on Wild Rice Lake. This happens from time as they can. That
The
is,
Ho-Chunk has done that too.
yeah, so is the Potawatomi. There's property around Indian Lake, up by Land O'Lakes and the like. John, you have a question?
Yeah, about mound sites, Native American mound sites, the Indian mound sites down by Lake Tomahawk.
Yep.
Those aren't signed. They've never been signposted.
There's signs there, and Cindy made them.
There are signs there now?
Yeah, and it was overseen by,
Right at the parking area, where you can walk in, there's a sign that was put up a couple of years ago.
But just a couple of weeks ago? You say just recently?
years.
Years.
Okay, just a few years ago. Okay, I haven't been back there for a while, but there had been no signage and there was no fencing around there. It wasn't protected.
Yeah, there's still no fencing or anything around it, but there's no camping anymore, and there's no access, you have to park there and walk in, you can't drive anywhere anymore. And then there is a sign that talks about the mounds and just basically what that means. And I sent that to the Ho-Chunk, so that they could correct any wrong statements that I made, and actually what they did is they added some things that were very important. But it's just one sign, and it's right as you drive in there and you park, and then you'll see the sign up there.
I guess I would like to see it protected so people aren't just stomping all over the joint.
I know.
And you know, the archaeological magazine back in 1919, I had some copies of someone identifying, it may have been Brown or whoever was identifying mounds all over the place up here. All over the place. Are there any efforts taking place to identify those mound sites and protect those mound sites?
The Electric Land over the years has worked with, or tried to work with the city of Naco, and it has been very spotty to be able. There isn't very much left, but it's been very spotty. Val might be able to talk about that. Talk to Val about that because she's also part of she's the tribal archaeologist now, and she's also part of the Historic Preservation Office. And so they would report if there was some kind of damage or if there were people found, during construction projects or something like that. But as far as being able to identify some of those, again, it's private property, and it's really difficult to get people to cooperate.
One of the things that's really revolutionized this dramatically is the advent of LiDAR for detection, and so we know more in some cases, but then what's actionable, private property and other entanglements, it's a very sensitive issue to begin with. So, but it's an important one. I agree with you, and probably evolving. Any others? Yes.
Jim, I don't know if we know the answer to this or not, but the Griffith Nursery down at Rapids, is that on the German design too? Must be, I would assume.
We were there, Kate. What do you think? Looked like it was the German design to me.
Yeah.
As we drove around there with Ricky Kubicek, we got some artifacts to put in activity areas
It's very
outside
exciting.
for kids.
They should have called me, I'm only about 5 miles southeast of that.
Yeah, it was kind of
It's
a
very
last minute
exciting
run.
exploration.
We filled up my pickup truck with fun stuff.
And there's a Griffith Avenue there too. So, yeah, now I can tell you. Still here.
So Tom and I were kibitzing in the back here, and we were talking about the public land debate, and kind of said it hasn't changed much in 80 years. How much public land we have is still somewhat controversial. And a big part of that is the tax implication it has on towns and counties. I just wanted to make the point today, when the state purchases land, they make full payments in lieu of taxes, but that doesn't discount, the impacts of all the federal and state land. It does impact income, but as Jim pointed out, when you have a big chunk of public forest, there's no school buses going out there. There's no, the infrastructure is less, with fewer roads. So it's an important debate that I think people should inform themselves. And people have different viewpoints, and it's still today almost as controversial.
Oh, it is. Let me show you something that's really important. You see these federal lands? And you see how there's none in Marinette County? Marinette County told the feds, you stay away. This is our land. And you talk to the folks in Marinette County who manage their resources and they get direct benefits. And you talk to people in Forest County who have to wait on the federal government to give them whatever they want to give them. It's like the tale of two cities. And some, like Iron County and Marinette County, make active, proactive maneuvers. And others just said, oh yeah, we'll go into this as well. And oh boy, what a difference it makes for those counties, those communities, and their tax bases going forward. So that goes all the way back to the 30s, as some county boards were just, they had a sharper pencil and greater vision, and it made a huge, huge difference. Yes?
I'm from Lang Lake County. We have 135,000 acres of county forest. And without the income from that forest, our budget is decimated. For instance, last year, the last lower prices for forest products, we had $1 million less money to work with. I walked in the forestry office a couple of days ago. I said, what happened to this young lady? She's been laid off. We can't afford her. This is what county forests do. But they're well managed and have a good professional group of foresters. But it's extremely important for our county of 20,000 people.
Well, yeah, and Griffith saw all this. I put the quote up there. Doug, the guy who liaisons with you, says, I want all those slides. He says, you're exactly right. I've never seen this connection done so well. See, I taught in Oconto County right here. Oconto County is not a wealthy county, and it would have benefited a great deal from this. Over in Marathon County, some board decided to sell that land like 40 years ago, and they've been trying to buy it back ever since. So they made a short-term gain, and then they had to pay more money to get back what they already had. This is like, somebody should do a master's thesis on this whole county versus federal forest and the dynamics between it and the outcomes, because it affects 30 counties, because that's how many they're in. And it's really quite a dynamic outcome for the people and the quality of life in those counties. Yes?
So is there an advantage am I wording this wrong or thinking of this too narrowly? Is there an advantage to one or the other? For instance, Langlade County is got those, and Marinette County's got those county lands versus Price, which has a combination of both. Is it advantageous to be associated with one or the other or both?
I think if you ask Forest County, they tell you it would have been better to be county land.
Why?
Because you control your revenue and use. I mean, compare your income from county lands in Price County to the income, think if that was all county land, that they get from Iron County, which would be comparable. Let's see what the number is.
Are they able though to maintain, George, are you able with the county lands, are you able to maintain consistency over time compared to, say, the resources that the federal government can show for conservation? Is that a fair question or not?
Well, the forest had, got hit hard a few years ago when one of these windstorms came through there, and this hurt. But generally, being on the board for a number of years, I was aware that we got pretty much what we determined would be the cut for that portion of the forest. And the recreational part of it is being increased with another campground. Jack Lake is very well used for recreational purposes. Doesn't bring in any money, but it doesn't cost us anything. We have national forests around us to the east. There might even be a little bit in Langlade County, I'm not sure.
It is.
But, boy, without that 135,000 acres, we would not have the programs that we do in the county.
There you go. And so the arc from Griffith to that period in the 20s to today, Griffith's words are absolutely on the money. Yeah, okay.
So this may be a weird question. As I look at that map, where the national forests are, is that indicative that farm settlements were heavier in the national forest areas, and that land was purchased by the federal government for reclamation and helping the
Back taxes,
homesteaders find a new way to live. So there was more agriculture where the national forests are. In the beginning when the settlement, when I did all my work years in Mississippi, during the Depression, the federal government came in and bought up all kinds of farmland that was going delinquent and resettled many of those people onto land that was more productive. Would that have been the case?
In Price County, the case is, Jim, if you want to show them the Chequamegon there, the case, up a little bit more, right there. Okay.
Up. There you go.
No, that's not Price County.
Isn't that Price?
No, right there, Jim, that's Price County. Okay, now, the majority of the lands in Price County are east of the railroad. And those are all lands that were logged over and owned by lumber companies, Cornell and the Wisconsin Central. And when those lumber companies went out in the 30s, they went out. And those were all claimed for back taxes by the federal. And so the majority of Price County national forest lands are from the decline in the end of the logging era. There were settlers out there, primarily south of us in the town of Emory and that, who were displaced and removed and then given lands elsewhere in the state to farm that were somewhat more productive. But when you go out there in eastern Price County, that whole stretch east of the railroad, you're basically looking at gravel and sand. There are some farms out there, yes, but there's not like you would see in southern Trace County, which has a little bit better soils this year.
Jim, I was gonna say, you ought to expand this question a little bit. In Michigan, almost all of the tax forfeited lands went to the state. Only Gogebic County in the far end has 50,000 acres of county forest land. No state land, some federal land. In Wisconsin, it's almost all county land. In Minnesota, it's half state and half county. And I don't know why those differences, probably political. You explained a little bit of it here and what happened here. But in Michigan, the state promised the counties 10 cents an acre annually if they went to this. And the state, of course, replanted and did a lot of firework and did a lot of other work on that. Now some of the counties would like the land back, free of course. And so there is quite a bit of give and take in that. And if somebody did really look at it, it would be interesting to do all 3 states.
Yeah.
Because of the variances that have occurred in the 3 states.
Please.
The feds did encourage settlement of tax delinquent forest land southwest of Drummond. And they did create 10-acre parcels that they sold off to settlers. And some of those homesteads are still there today.
There's one in Harshaw over here, a resettlement area. Yes.
One opportunity that's occurring for county forests right now are carbon credits. So I live in Iron County, and Iron County just got a huge payoff of carbon credit on this county forest. So that's something that would be interesting for this group to understand more about. I still am confused personally about carbon credits and how it all works. But it seems to be a way for those of us who live in very poor counties. I live in Iron County. We have 5,800 people in the whole county. No stoplights today. You know, we need the county forest income. I do want to point out, though, we're kind of demonizing federal forest here. From an ecological standpoint, I'm going to make this statement. County forests cut harder than state forests. State forests cut harder than federal forests. For me, as a person who cares deeply about ecology, I care about our taxes too. Trying to find a balance. I don't want to make this just about money. I want us to remember there's other factors engaged.
So maybe a mix is a good thing, huh?
Yeah.
Like a diversified investment?
Well, that's why I asked the question before, John, is because with the Doring Tract and those hemlocks, you know, that hemlock preservation and that wilderness study area, my question is would the county have preserved that tract, or would the counties have preserved that with the county forest versus the federal oversight of those lands? And that's why my question, Jim, that I was asking is, you know, and of course it's the balance.
Let me give you a personal statement on that. That for whatever it's worth, when I wrote my book on old growth forest, I contacted the county forest. They refused to talk to me. They actually actively said, no, we will not talk to you. We don't want old growth forest. And they would not converse with me. I thought that was very interesting. Speaking federal folks who are much more cooperative, the county folks, there isn't any old growth fundamentally on county forests. They really pushed hard, and I get it. We need all those services, that money from the county forest. I get why they cut as hard as they do. But there is no such, so I would bet you, speculative on my part, of course, but there would be no tuck of hemlocks if it was county forest, because that economic pressure is very strong in those small counties.
And Doring's grandson is a retired emeritus professor of ecological science at Purdue. And so that family had that. He was a charter member of the Isaac Walton League, so he had that whole when they sold out. But there was a great fear in 67, 68 when they were announcing the sale as to where that was going to go, that 33,000 acre headwaters plot. So, anyway,
really a fascinating discussion, and I know we have to hear from one more camp on this, so I know Matt has been back there.
Oh, I just had a quick question. Was that Iron County only that gave you that response, John?
I'm sorry, what?
Was that just Iron County that gave you the...
No, I talked to the whoever was the coordinator of all county
Oh,
forests,
the
she
executive
wrote me back a
director.
letter and said, we will not talk to you. I have the letter. I was shocked.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of a sad statement, because I think you do see certain counties, because they have more autonomy and are, those boards, the county boards direct the county forest to do, so there's some local accountability, and there are examples of counties that have decided we want this as a part of our mosaic, so, it's kind of frustrating that broadly the group representing all county forests wouldn't talk to you, because individually, certain county forests are setting aside tracts, either as a state natural area or as their own unique area within their county forest ownership. I mean, we have one on the Rusk and Barron County line that actually stretches into both counties called the Blue Hills Fencing. Maybe you've been there.
I have not, but that's encouraging.
Yeah, and that's an example of a local county saying, this is ours, this is how we're gonna, act differently. So there is, local accountability.
I'd just like to make one more call. We've been talking about this map, and we're all fascinated. I want to turn this into the best teaching tool we can to encapsulate many of these things as it goes in the Northwoods Forest History Experience. So if you could give me any information, feedback, how to concisely frame the conservation versus the economic possibilities and how there are differences, not making a judgment. These are just facts. They're just bold-faced facts, and so people can be more informed about our forests. So I invite you to share with me as you can. Thank you.